Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Untitled Reviews. Now with this specific video, it's another laptop for you all. We're going to be taking a look at something perhaps a little bit more affordable this time. This is Samsung's Galaxy Book Go, which on paper at 399 quid does look like quite the bargain on paper. This is a Windows 10 based laptop, I must stress, and it looks like Samsung are trying to perhaps disrupt the Chromebook market a little by offering a slightly more wallet-friendly Windows machine. What you'll find underneath is a Qualcomm Snapdragon 7C, which is a similar processor to the one featured on the Acer Chromebook Spin 513, meaning that this is an ARM-based Windows laptop, which I'll come on to why this is quite intriguing in a moment, alongside 4 gigs of RAM, which can be upgraded if you're willing to shell out a little bit more, and 128 gig SSD. And on paper, the specs of this Samsung Galaxy Book Go look rather good indeed. But how does it perform in the real world? So, first things first, let's discuss the design of the Galaxy Book Go. Well, what you'll find from the outset is a rather nice looking and silver shell, but to be perfectly honest, that's the only thing that's necessarily nice about this specific machine. When having a kind of a proper close look at this, you'll find that this particular Galaxy Book Go feels quite rough and possibly quite cheap compared to the smooth finishes of other silver and more budget-looking laptops, which is a rather a shame actually, considering what else you get. You've got a weight of 1.38 kilos, making this on the lighter end of the spectrum for laptops. Not only more budget-oriented ones, but also laptops in general, meaning that this is quite the portable fellow indeed. It's not a convertible machine and there isn't a touchscreen, but you can intriguingly push the screen entirely flat. There is a kind of, I think what Samsung describes as a 90-degree hinge from memory, which is rather interesting, but I'll cover that a little bit more in the display section. And the other thing to note really here is that because this has an ARM-based system with it running a Qualcomm Snapdragon 7C, like the Acer Chromebook Spin 513, a smash hit, not only on the channel but also from general reviews, means that there's less cooling needed, so it's actually quite a thin machine indeed. But otherwise, the Galaxy Book Go feels like its price. It feels relatively cheap, quite hollow, and possibly a little bit flimsy in the wrong hands. But if you're just looking for a laptop to get you by overall for design, then this one probably will be a relatively decent option. And to be honest, it's much the same. It's much the same story as the speakers. They work relatively well for basic tasks, as you'd probably expect a 399 quid laptop to do. But to be honest, they don't necessarily handle the top end well, sounding rather tinny and distorted if you really want some high volume. And to be honest, the fact they are downward firing, being mounted straight down, that is, with two separate grills, means that sound is affected by what surface that this is placed on. On soft surfaces like a mouse mat or a bed, if you're working after dark or just fancy a more lazy day of working, if you're working from home perhaps, then this won't necessarily be the best option. But if you place it on a hard surface like a desk or something like usual, then the audio won't be as affected, and you probably could get a decent bit of ambience with that. So, what about the keyboard, trackpad, and those other kind of pieces with the Galaxy Book Go? Well, to be honest, given the feature set, it is literally just the keyboard and trackpad. Well, actually, the keyboard itself can feel pretty tactile to the touch. But there isn't a fingerprint reader, and it isn't necessarily backlit, unfortunately, which could be an issue for those people who either like working after dark or students who perhaps plan to use it in a dim lecture hall. It does look rather basic with that kind of white on black legends, which mean it's got plenty of purpose to it, but otherwise it's not the most awe-inspiring thing. The only thing I will say here is at least you'll find quite a large trackpad. This can feel a little bit jittery given the kind of rather cheap feeling surface that it's necessarily comprised of, but it's rather large. The tracking is relatively accurate as well, and the buttons itself feel rather tactile. They don't feel like you're pushing down a wet sponge, for example, which is usually my go-to comparison point for anything cheap, which this Samsung laptop is, but its trackpad and keyboard don't necessarily feel that way. On the port front though, I'm pleased to say that the Galaxy Book Go isn't necessarily as cheap as I've made it seem. Samsung have at least been decent enough to provide a reasonable selection. On one side you'll find a headphone jack, micro SD card and a Type-C port for charging and also connecting to Thunderbolt displays, as well as on the other side another Type-C, a USB-A for connecting hard drives or USB sticks, a Kensington lock and also, rather intriguingly, a SIM card slot. Now you might be wondering, why would a laptop have a SIM card slot? Well, to that dear viewer I'll tell you, that because this is an ARM-based laptop, you can actually use an LTE connection with this specifically. So if you want to pop in a SIM card that's got a data plan attached to it, then you can use kind of your own mobile data for internet browsing if you are either on the go or away from any form of public or private, indeed, Wi-Fi. So onto the display. What have Samsung bestowed us with here on this rather affordable laptop? Well, you'll find that it's a 14-inch 1080p panel that offers relatively average performance with a decent screen size. There's some relatively thin bezels on the left and the right, but it is kind of letterboxed, if you like, by some quite thick bezels on the top and especially the bottom. The top I can forgive because it houses a 720p webcam. But where this really does fall down, and the real problem I have with the Galaxy Book Go, is its brightness figure. A quoted brightness here of 150 nits seems awfully low, not just for a laptop at this kind of more budget end of the spectrum, but a laptop anyway. That cuts the 300 nit target that we have set by other laptops on this channel, and just in general, in half, which means that what you're getting here is a rather dim machine, and in the real world it doesn't provide as probably as quarter of a good as the experience as other laptops. To be perfectly honest, this the screen and the colours itself, they're relatively okay, but the fact that they are a little bit dim means that overall things look a little bit flatter. They're not as vibrant or pop as much as they perhaps should at this particular price. If you do want a laptop for something that you'll use for casual viewing every now and again, the Galaxy Book Go will of course suffice. But for anything a little bit more intense, then you're probably better off looking elsewhere. The only real saving grace here, though, is the fact that it's more of an anti-glare panel. But considering the brightness is so low anyway, you don't want to take this outside, and if there is any direct sunlight, you probably won't be able to see the screen anyway, to be brutally honest. So surely there must be some saving grace when we come to discuss performance. The fact it's an ARM-based machine means that it's quite slim, there's decent ports, so you'd probably be expecting some rather good performance indeed, although I'll draw your attention to the fact that this is an ARM-based Windows laptop. The fact it runs Windows on its own is absolutely fantastic, and by rights there should be plenty of compatibility. But the problem you get is that because this is an ARM-based machine, and the Qualcomm Snapdragon 7C and Adreno 618 onboard graphics can't really run Windows at all, even with this being streamlined Windows 10S, there's no real kind of intensive apps that work with this. Granted, you probably won't necessarily want to use them, but you can't get 3D Mark or PC Mark 10, for example, to work. Because the fact this is an ARM-based machine, it's not able to handle the more demanding operating system Windows 10 actually is. You're better off sticking, if you do want something ARM-based, to the Spin 513 or other ARM-based laptops that can run Chrome OS, for example, as it's probably better suited with it being a slightly lighter operating system. Unfortunately, the Galaxy Book Go is chronically slow in real-world testing, as demonstrated by those compatibility issues with Windows 10 for one thing. But another thing that is rather slow indeed, if you like, is the overall performance from the hard drive. Well, I say hard drive, it is actually a 128GB SSD, so I'll give Samsung some due for doubling the storage of the Chromebook Spin 513 and at least making it at least trying to bring it up to some standards of 2021, but its reads and writes aren't necessarily the best things in the world, which means that loading data will take a little bit more time than you probably first anticipate. And if you do want something that's rather snappy, but want to run Windows, you're probably better off spending double the money on a machine. But if you're opting for a machine like this, the chances are you're wanting to try and get the Windows experience on a budget. And to that, I'll tell you to wait a little bit longer for a better laptop to come along and stick with something that's running Chrome OS for now. So, what about battery life? Well, actually, I will say this. The battery life of the Galaxy Book Go is arguably the only reason you might buy this machine. What you'll find is that it will last around 13 and a half hours. Well, they're the figures that I got out of it before it finally conked out. But otherwise, this beats off even some of the more high-end Chromebooks that will last you around 12 hours and practically double some of the battery life of some of the more high-end Windows laptops that we've seen. And to be perfectly honest, this is down to the fact that this is an ARM-based laptop. The Chromebook Spin 513 also saw notable gains in battery life compared to its Intel-based counterparts, as ARM-based machines do seem to offer much better battery life. To be honest, though, the 13-hour battery life that you get with this machine isn't enough to save it from fading into laptop-based obscurity. But more on that in a moment. So, in conclusion then, should you buy Samsung's Galaxy Book Go? Well, to be brutally honest, this is quite a hard sell. It's probably only a good purchase option if you're somebody who's looking for a rather light machine that you can carry around. It's certainly quite portable with that relatively low weight of around 1.35 kilos or so. Or if you're somebody who desperately wants to try a Windows machine on an ARM processor, although I will say is don't expect blisteringly fast performance at all. Or if you're somebody who just wants a laptop to get you by as a bit of a stopgap between purchasing something, this will get you by just fine, but no more than that. But the real standout reason you'd probably buy a laptop like this is for that 13-hour battery life. That's the only thing here that's really hard to argue with. But it is plagued by a fair few shortcomings, including a slow performance, slightly cheap build quality, and probably a lack of ports if you want to be really nitpicky as such. But I suppose all that really remains to be said is that if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and of course subscribe to the channel, and of course to ring the notification bell so you don't miss any future uploads. We've got some rather intriguing peripheral reviews coming up that you don't want to miss, so make sure to ring the bell so you get notified when those videos do go live, whenever that may be. To, of course, follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Indeed, the link should be appearing to that on the screen right about now. And to, if you want to rep the Untitled brand, as it were, there's now an Untitled Spring store that exists and has done for a few months. I'll leave a link to that down in the description, where you can find all sorts of t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, zip-up hoodies, mugs, pint glasses, wall art, canvas art, and everything in between, all down there, and they do ship worldwide too, which is absolutely marvellous. And of course, if you like any of the kit that we feature in these videos, be it this rather interesting, to say the least, Samsung Galaxy Book Go, or any of the other myriads of laptops, keyboards, mice, multimedia controllers, microphones, headsets, and all sorts of other things we've featured on the channel over the last 2 years or so, then of course we'll leave Amazon links down in the description to the respective videos where you can pick all that kit up. So once again, thank you very much for watching.